we'll pick it up with Kalevi.
Thank you. So you Gilbert, made very nicely this from Simondonian individuation model now well, translated it into a model of sign formation. So, and here one of the big problems we have in biosemiotics is that we have some very general models of sign formation, while these are described in so general terms that we are actually in difficulties how to apply these in particularly in minimal now, so to say, biophysical systems. So Peircean system model is in a way similar, because this is also described in very, very general terms, and via that model we can find the minimal semiotic systems in the world. We really cannot precisely say. Now, if to compare Simondonian, say, sign formation model as you do it, whether you can see that it is in some sense, in some aspects, more operational or more useful, or adds some operational aspect in comparison to Peircean model?
Oh, that's a tough question, because I really don't feel like a Peirce expert at all. I would pass this question, for example, to Don, who has gained already some acquaintance with the Simondonian thinking. So may I ask Don to answer some part of this question such that I could comment on it?
My acquaintance with the Simondonian position comes largely secondhand through the teaching sessions that Yammer and Josh have been putting on. So I myself don't know if I could speak to that, except to say that, correct me if I'm wrong, Yammer, the vital mode of individuation is what we would call the biological, correct? As opposed to the physical mode, or is it not that distinct?
Yes, no, vital is biological, although, of course, when you say biology, that's why I prefer to use the word he uses in French, vital, because when we say biology, it evokes too much the separate discipline of biology, which is not. He refers to a mode of individuation, which is built on and uses physical individuation, kind of regulating it, leashing and unleashing it. So,
right, please. And that's the key, because it's leashing and unleashing what we've referred to variously as, possibility states, semiotic indeterminacy, things like this. You call it pre-individuation, as opposed to the physical pleroma systems that don't do that. So to Kalevi's question, if we're looking at the smallest threshold between the living and the non-living, that's the kind of distinction we would make. Does the non-living exhaust its pre-individuality? Does the living access it somehow and do something with it? That's what I would think would be the way to frame it. Do you agree?
Yes, as a matter of fact, in our article in Biosemiotics journal about, what was it, multi-level semiosis, I think, issue, we have mentioned that, namely, Simondon explicitly indicates a scale and the level of complexity from which onwards vital individuation would be possible. And that is the order of magnitude and the complexity of large molecules, long molecules, which are complex enough to have, to allow for multiple stable configurations between which they can switch. So they are not only bistable, but multi-stable in that sense, and open to external perturbations, couplings that could make them switch between one or the other. So this is from Simondonian point of view, I mean, he really names them biologically and physically. Below that level, he says, structures are pre-physical and pre-biological, he says. In order to be able to distinguish them, you have to go beyond that level such that you can talk about structures converging to a stable state and losing all their tensions and metastability, or structures that maintain the possibility of further dynamics which can be evoked from within.
Right. So I want to ask Josh to speak to this because, again, that very notion is very highly resonant. Calevi's calling it choice. I prosaically call it possibility, right? And Josh, for you, I think that's something about oscillation, correct?
Yeah, well, definitely. But before I comment on oscillations per se, I'd like to riff off where Jagmar just left off, because it's exactly how I would answer Calevi's question and also address Peter's notion of, dealing with the paradox. And Simondon has a nice way of distinguishing between the physical individuation and vital individuation, talking about neoteny. In other words, this idea that physical individuation almost in a way is allowed to go to maturity, right? So it kind of, it just has its one stable state. If this crystal has enough solution, it'll just keep going in perpetuity, never doing what the vital form of individuation would do, which preserves, as Jagmar was just saying, preserves some of that pre-individuality, and in essence isn't allowed to grow up. And that he talks about it at every stage, even into the psycho collective, that it's these successive levels of I forget the proper biological term for juvenilization, that you're allowing, you're preserving, in essence, like life, going to that vital, that break. We have to rigorously understand how it is the dynamics preserves potential, preserves that pre-individuality, and preserves, and Simondon talks about a Peircean, the Aristotelian notion of kind of the infinitesimal potential, if you will, like in Jagmar nicely characterized in her talk, that on the other side of her, I think the left side of her diagram, that there's no individuality there. And in that way, we can talk both about the oscillation, but the oscillation is tricky too, because going all the way back to Paul Weiss, he had this idea of circular causality, sorry. But as Jagmar again nicely articulated, that we've got to be careful that we're not into cybernetics or second order cybernetics when we're talking about an oscillatory circuit or an oscillatory living system, that there's a simultaneity, that the pre-individual, that potential, is simultaneous with the structures that are emerging. And then we were talking with Nora yesterday about re-merging back into that pre-individuality. And then just one final comment addressing Peter. I think Simondon, I was really excited to discover Simondon, not the least of which because he was one of the first philosophers that was willing to take a crack at the law of the excluded middle. I don't think if you take the law of the excluded middle as like your starting point, you're just not going to get there. I'm just going to say that right out, okay? Like if you're not willing to face the law of the excluded middle and at least challenge it, at least be open, if you will, like open yourself up to the pre-individual that's underneath the surface of having typed, having gone through the semiotic process of typing, like how were we able to get to that point in the first place? And I think I'll leave you with Cantor. I was really deeply inspired by, as was Simondon, I believe. Cantor's ability is really the foundation upon which Gödel's incompleteness theorem, even Turing's halting problem, are founded on Cantor's diagonalization, demonstrating that the infinity between 0 and 1, the continuous infinity between 0 and 1, is larger than countable infinities. In other words, the infinity of counting 1, 2, 3, 4 up to a countable infinity is distinct, is smaller. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think when it comes to logical types and paradoxes, as Jagmar, I think, rightly pointed out, is that paradox is sort of a problem we get ourselves in. And that life, in essence, lives by virtue of the fact of not getting itself caught in paradox, pre-human anyway, that it faces the tension, and then in solving the tension by generating internally these new dimensions out of this infinity between 0 and 1, if you will, out of this pre-individual, out of, pulling out these relevant possibilities, that you actually generate more tension. And it's a never-ending process. There's no solution to the paradox. There's no...
I think this is very resonant with Calevi's idea that any system that can operate under logical laws is not semiosis, right? That it's precisely that moment where the law of the excluded middle is not serving you, that you need to move into some kind of new semiotic state. Would you agree with that, Calevi?
I would add here one sentence that if oscillation is indeed in the bottom of semiosis, as you seem to now propose, this means that it gives us a measure of simultaneity. That means the length of that minimum present for semiosis. So I think that's not so much discussed in semiotics, that we can start from certain oscillation from even just on any semiosis. So, but I think that's a possible model indeed, because that can be just connected or linked very well with that idea of simultaneity as having a minimal length.
James, is your hand still up? Oh, sorry. I just wanted to, James, is your hand still up?
Oh, yes, it is.
Okay, I'll let Jagmar answer Calevi's and Josh's point and Terry's, then we'll talk to you, James.
So I would be careful in using the word oscillation, because as an engineer, it evokes in my mind a periodic behavior, which is strict repetition, which is not what should be assumed here. It can be something that seems to us as a perfect repetition, but that's most probably because we are not able to observe all those hidden dynamics that are not yet manifest. So that's actually what I was also trying to indicate when I said there is no perfect repetition in this circularity. When the system goes back to a pre-individual mode, it is not the same pre-individual mode. I mean, how can you compare one lack of structure to another lack of structure? And even on the structure side, when you are comparing to structured beings, well, you can have some resemblance, but exact identity is not possible. So as a matter of fact, it is thanks to feedback and negative feedback, thanks to its error corrective behavior, that the deviations in such repetitions are minimized, such that under certain circumstances, in certain domains, certainly in technological domains and most of the time, but also in all those areas where you can, for example, live with code biology, there is a strong repetition which is actively maintained via negative feedback, but it does not capture all aspects of the being.
Okay, James, I told this would be a deep session. James.
Okay, thank you. Going back to the Terry and Jagmer's notions about interpreter and interpreter, that stimulated some thoughts in my mind. I think that we humans are we're bigoted in terms of identity and notion and selfness. And we think in terms of a oneness. And that tends to be a thing. But as a biologist, I'm very aware of the multiplicity of our neurologies, so that we have intentional parts of our nervous system, but we also have a very important autonomic nervous system. And we have pluralities of aspects to mind and thinking. And in a linguistic semiotic sense, that as I was studying Whorf years ago, it occurred to me that we have a very strange phenomenon that we don't always put a lot of awareness to. And that is, as we are responding and talking together, part of it, as we're recalling ideas, we are almost as if we're thinking backwards in time, searching for ideas in order to think forward. But the other thing is too, that as we are creating experience, words and ideas, we are freshly experiencing our own words, even in the moment as we think they are something preordained that we're just expressing outwardly. We are co-experiencers of our own, what we co-produce. So that counterplay back and forth gets to be where it drives us to, like, well, which are we going to prioritize, the hearing or the production? Which are we at any given time, when we're really a multiplicity of all these phenomena simultaneously, and we handle it with very good aplomb and very good ease. And that's how living creatures endure in life experientially. I see Jagmer nodding yes, a positive. So your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, that what you have been saying looks like an approval of why Simondon is not necessarily and generally, generically proposing structure and operation as coming into play sequentially. They exist simultaneously. As a matter of fact, in the part where, in his thesis, where he introduces these ideas, this duality, he really introduces this referring to the wave-particle duality of light. So these are really dual aspects of the same thing, he says, which cannot be separated from each other. And that pretty well fits into what you are saying. Just a second, I have to switch on the light.
In the comments, we have a very, I'm sure, cryptic or deep comment by Terry, and then Gary. Terry, you want to expand upon this small but probably quite intense comment?
Well, all of this comes from the discussions of circularity and the way that different people have dealt with paradox. And this is, in a sense, the circularity of logical types. And I've just tried to represent it here, as I have in a paper I've written some years ago, by just talking about the various paradoxical systems that have expanded and expanded over time, mostly in logic, but I think they lead us into the same problem, which has to do with, begins with, actually with logical types, and then Gödel and so on and so forth, but it begins all the way back with imaginary numbers. They forced us into this indefinite circularity, and you can try to resolve each one of them by, you might say, to resolve the square root of -1. You're actually forced to continually compute it. You can't stop, because once you substitute, I equals a -1 over I, substitute I for -1 over I again. It just really, that produces a continuous minus plus minus plus minus plus, except where I equals 0, where any of the values equals 0, and that allows you to produce indefinite dimensionality. And the problem we have here is that as soon as you get this kind of circularity, I think we indeed have this problem we've talked about, that is, you can't stop openness, that the system has to remain open. And this is what gets us into time. We can't escape time. We can't escape openness. And both Gary and I have been sort of talking around it in different ways.
And I think that's a good thing, yes?
If I could add something, okay. First of all, the minute you partition a system, you've got problems, right? That's the concept that comes out of Basil Hiley and David Bohm's book called The Undivided Universe. So you can't divide a system into the interpreting and the interpreted, right? That's an artificial division. First thing. Second thing, what the hell are imaginary numbers all about anyway, right? I mean, So I learned something about that from a woman named Ruth Kastner, who is the originator of the possibilistic transactional interpretation of the quantum mechanics, and the idea being, and also John Kramer, who originated the transitional interpretation, which is the idea that when something is imaginary, it's going backward in time, okay? When it's real, it's going forward in time, and when it's imaginary, it's going backward in time, and that's the nature of transaction. Transaction that goes all the way down to the atomic level, right? You have an excited atom, and you have a whole bunch of less excited atoms. And all of a sudden, something weird happens. There's a photon that just gets, flows across to one of those less excited atoms. Why does it happen when it happens? I mean, is there free will all the way down? Is there maybe volition all the way down? Is there conscious agency all the way down? Is there pansemiosis all the way down? It's a question.
And that's where we probably will part company.
James?
Well,
Yammer,
if you believe in cynicism, okay, because it comes down to Peircean cynicism and the true Peircean continuum, which is super multitudinous, which is very special. It's not a Cantorian continuum.
Yammer, so you moved on to a screen.
I try to answer this question by saying that when a system is complex enough to undergo vital individuation, and even further, psychic and psychocollective individuation, it is able to even amplify the metastability and the tensions. So it enters such an unstable state, so much pregnant to changes, that any slightest perturbation is able to give rise to a new structuration. So this increased instability is the ground out of which freedom can be born, from my perspective. If this freedom can be associated with a will, that is to say, directing the outcome of the freedom, depends on how much self-control the agent has, in my opinion.
Okay, James, and then we'll be at the end of our time, but I think anyone who wants to stay can stay. This is an amazing discussion, a lot of fun. James?
Oh, just that. No, I want to just jump in about the volition thing. I see it as necessary in all systems, whether they're living or non-living. I think that's an absolute prior necessity. I think compatibility and coherence is an essential part of the fundamentals of space-time first. Systems don't interact unless they can see each other on any levels. And that begins with matter energy, scalings, whatever. And it's a little known thing. I think decision-making and proofs are a secondary artifact. This is just an opinion and analysis, but I know it's going to get a lot of arguments on it. But I think a lot of the traditional logic has been taking us off in a wrong direction, so that we're missing the forest for the trees. And so it's just with that in mind.
Okay. Yammer has asked to say something to the other speakers, and then
yeah,
officially have concluded today's gathering. No, the special event is now in half an hour.
Okay, as the last speaker, one doesn't get much chance to ask or refer to other speakers. So thank you all. It was very exciting, and I would really love to say a few words. Let me try to find my notes. Andres' talk was very interesting, and I have been writing to Don from the chat about nonlinear dynamics and bifurcation theories. I don't want to occupy you with that, but at least I can say a few things about Tori's and Josh's talk. one thing, there was a question directed to Tori, I suppose, regarding the randomness, right? Do you remember that, Tori? Yeah. So when you are making the simulation of, let's say, the bird flying, and then the simulators introduce some randomness to make it appear more lifelike. As a matter of fact, neither is the randomness they are introducing true randomness in quotation marks, because it is most of the time the random number generator they are resorting to, which is kind of long enough sequence that actually repeats itself, but long enough such that we cannot perceive it, nor could we say that there is no randomness anyway, because when you run such a simulated system, which let's assume everything else is deterministic, the determinism, as we perceive it, refers to the attractors, which can be also dynamic attractors, by the way, which are some subset, sub-manifold of the huge state space, actually, to which the system converges. But the funny thing is, of course, when we are really watching such a simulation, we never let the system converge to the actual attractor, which may take a long time, which is anyway an asymptotic process. So depending on where you start and how long you watch it, most of the time, most probably, you would see the system actually along this transient route, starting from some arbitrary initial condition. So what you watch is anyway not the attractor behavior, but some kind of behavior while the system converges to it. So there is also some randomness involved due to the arbitrary initial conditions the simulation is started from. So this is one thing I would like to indicate in that respect. There's also something I would like to tell Josh, but let me tell it in private. Let's not occupy everybody, if you wish.
Okay, so much food for thought. Some of it I understand, some of it I don't, but that's why it's food for thought. Ludmila, are you still with us as a co-host? Ludmila? Maybe not. No. Okay. Well, then we won't have a countdown clock because there's nobody here to put one on. But please, again, come back in 25 minutes. I guarantee you this is a performance you want to see. Okay. Thank you all for our second day. We've got 2 more days of great fun and looking forward to it. Good night, everyone.
Thanks.
You guys stay. I want to leave.
Hi, Todd.
Good night, everyone. Yeah, plenty of fun.
Thank you,
Get some
Don.
sleep.